In December 1777, Washington's tired and hungry army arrives at Valley Forge to camp for the winter. Following their recent defeats at Brandywine and Germantown, morale is low, and already on arrival, 1/3 of the 12,000 men are unfit for duty. Washington and the army face a bitterly cold winter ahead, while their enemy waits patiently and more comfortably just 1 day's march away in Philadelphia. Valley Forge is remote, with virtually no buildings and barren of provisions for the army, which already lacks almost everything it needs to survive for the winter. By the time the Continentals arrive, there is already deep snow on the ground, which takes its toll on many of the men who lack basic clothes and shoes. Washington quickly orders the construction of barracks, and some 1,500 log huts are soon constructed to house the men. But life in the cramped huts is miserable, and for much of December, January, and February, the only food available are fire cakes, a thin and basic bread. Washington does his best to organize supplies for the army, but even when they are found, moving goods into the remote camp proves difficult, with horses and wagons particularly scarce. Where supplies cannot be transported back, in many instances they are burnt to prevent them falling into enemy hands. As a result, many farmers prefer to sell to the British, perhaps out of anger, loyalty, or because the British pay in cash, compared to Washington's unreliable and unpopular promise notes for future payments. A lack of fodder kills horses by the hundred, and many of the carcasses are left unburied across the camp. With a limited water supply for cooking and washing, and no organized sanitation system to speak of, disease quickly spreads. Dysentery, influenza, and typhus make life miserable and deadly for everyone in the camp. For those that escape sickness, there is little to do at Valley Forge, which soon leads to a breakdown in discipline. There are no routine drills, parades, or training to speak of, causing many to desert or rob local farmers out of desperation and boredom. Thankfully for Washington, his persistence in organizing supplies begins to pay off, and the situation slowly but surely improves in camp. By March, the starving men, many thin to the bone, begin to eat meat again for the first time in months, and stricter rules on sanitation begins to alleviate the spread of disease. With the army's health slowly improving, Washington seizes an opportunity to get his men exercising and professionalize his force. A European officer had arrived in camp in February, reporting to have been a lieutenant general in the Prussian army. But the man, Frederick Wilhelm von Steuben, has greatly exaggerated his past, and is in fact a soldier of fortune fallen on hard times. But he impresses Washington nonetheless, who accepts his offer to train the Continentals. Von Steuben writes standardized training manuals for the army and begins instructing the regiments in close order drills. Learning these movements is critical for 18th century armies to effectively move on the battlefield, and they are rehearsed again and again under the watchful eye of von Steuben, who shouts and swears in his native German, endearing him to many of the men. As the snow melts and winter turns to spring, the army is, against all the odds, emerging with a renewed strength. The rank and file had grumbled for months about the state and organization of the army, but they never lost faith in Washington, who they were now more devoted to than ever. Valley Forge will be the deadliest encampment of the war for the Continentals, with thousands dead from exposure and disease. For those that survive the ordeal, many have forged a deep loyalty to their regiments and the army, and with fresh training, they were now more eager than ever to fight. While Washington struggles with his army, across the Atlantic, Benjamin Franklin has secured a monumental victory for the Revolution. Through a brilliant diplomatic effort, in February 1778, Franklin signs a treaty of alliance and friendship with France. The French seek revenge against the British for defeats suffered in the 7 Years' War and hope to humble their chief global rival. In London, following the defeat at Saratoga, the Franco-American alliance makes for grim reading, and the British government now faces a strategic dilemma with the prospect of fighting a very global conflict. With war seemingly inevitable, the British decide to skip any further pretense, and they declare war on France in March 1778. General Howe, who wishes to be relieved as he faces growing criticism for his handling of the war, is finally replaced in May by his subordinate, General Sir Henry Clinton. Howe had been a skilled battlefield tactician and remained undefeated in North America. But he had been a poor commander-in-chief, failing to coordinate British forces across the continent or developing a singular strategic vision for the war. His replacement, Clinton, is keen for action and a new approach. But his orders from London instruct him to be both on the defensive and ready to send troops to defend the hugely lucrative Caribbean islands from French attack. With an impending expansion of the war, Clinton knows he can expect little to no reinforcements from Britain, and he therefore plans to consolidate his positions before considering new operations. In June, the British prepare to evacuate Philadelphia. Supplying the city has remained a challenge, and Clinton recognizes that the capital now holds little strategic value in the war. Thousands of loyalists leave with the British, and civilians are loaded onto ships and sent to the safety of New York. Meanwhile, Clinton and 10,000 men are to march overland with a vast supply train of 1,500 wagons. They abandon the city on the 18th of June with a column stretching 12 miles long on the road. Washington in many ways is the opposite of General Howe. The Continental Commander-in-Chief is a brilliant strategist for the wider war, but at times a mediocre battlefield general. Although much like his army, Washington is adapting. Perhaps recognizing his static defenses can be outflanked, and that his army cannot yet coordinate overly complicated maneuvers, Washington now instead plans to use his army's flexibility and speed of movement to strike against the strung out and vulnerable British column as it leaves Philadelphia. With 13,500 men, Washington cautiously begins to stalk Clinton's force while looking for an opportunity to attack. On the 27th of June, Washington believes that opportunity has arrived, and he orders his second-in-command, General Charles Lee, to attack the British rearguard the next morning with the hope of drawing the British into an engagement on his terms. At Monmouth Courthouse, the British column remains overextended on narrow, sandy roads. Clinton is unconcerned and privately hopes for a battle to compensate for the humiliation of abandoning Philadelphia. The general is at the back of the column with his 2,000-strong rearguard, and at 5 a.m. on a clear June morning, the British set off once more. Lee's force of 5,000 men advances on the road east and makes first contact with dragoons of the Queen's Rangers, driving them away. The Continentals move forward slowly and cautiously, fearful of a British ambush. The terrain, largely unknown to both sides, consists of gentle rolling hills interspersed by woods and streams. As they approach Monmouth Courthouse, they again drive off the Loyalist cavalry, but now artillery fire forces them to take cover in nearby woods. Lee, sensing an opportunity, expects his left to fix the British in place, while he brings his main body to flank and destroy the enemy rearguard in a pincer movement. But Lee issues few actual orders, and only one of his 3 commanders is informed of the plan, leaving most of the vanguard guessing. Clinton, meanwhile, has not been idle, and upon seeing the Continentals in the morning, he calls for reinforcements, which is promptly answered by over 2,000 men under General Grey. The British start to engage the Continentals on the left, and for a third time in the campaign, Grey and Wayne's troops go head-to-head against one another. The two forces trade volleys, but without receiving orders of what to do, the Continental commanders are unnerved by growing enemy numbers and feel increasingly isolated. At the same time, Lee's main body has started engaging British grenadiers on the right under the command of the young and talented Marquis de Lafayette. Volleys are traded across the field and artillery opens up on both sides. Accurate British cannon fire starts to decimate the Continental lines, and despite the brave stand, Lafayette's Pennsylvanians are soon forced back down the road. Upon seeing the withdrawal, the Continental left assumes that a general retreat has been ordered, and they quickly follow suit. In the confusion, Lee is unable to exercise any effective command of the retreat, but at a regimental level, units are moving in good order, which critically maintains their cohesion and ability to continue fighting, something von Steuben would have been undoubtedly proud of. With the Continentals on the run, Clinton smells blood in the water and now hopes not just to defend his baggage train, but destroy the American vanguard as well. As fresh troops arrive under General Cornwallis, Clinton now has 10,000 men ready to move west in pursuit. For most of the morning, Washington had been completely unaware that the fighting had started, and when he eventually finds a confused General Lee on the field, he is furious at the retreat and reprimands his second-in-command on the spot. Washington rallies retreating troops and quickly organises fresh lines to hold the British. He desperately needs time for his army to arrive, and orders Wayne to set up an ambush as a delaying action and Lee to set up a secondary line. By now, the afternoon sun is taking its toll on both armies, and many start to fall from heat exhaustion in their wool uniforms. Along the dusty road, as grenadiers march past Wayne's men, a deadly volley is unleashed on the British, and many dozens fall on the spot. With their colonel among the wounded, the grenadiers charge violently into the trees after their ambushers. Wayne's men are waiting for them, and both sides engage in bloody and confused fighting throughout the woods. In just a few minutes of fighting, dozens will be killed on both sides. The Continentals are eventually forced from the woods and into a clearing where baying dragoons are waiting for them. A number are cut down in the ensuing charge, as the rest scramble desperately to get back to friendly lines. As the British push out of the woods, they are met by artillery fire from the second line. Not letting up the momentum, Clinton orders an attack, and the British begin to storm headlong into the American positions along the hedgerows. There is more desperate hand-to-hand fighting, but the British still have the numbers and keep pushing forward through the smoke and chaos. Lee's line is eventually broken, and he retreats with his men, being one of the last officers to cross the bridge to safety. In less than 30 minutes, hundreds of dead and wounded have been left strewn across the field in some of the bloodiest fighting of the war. The Continental delaying action had come at a high price for both sides, but it has also given much needed time for Washington's main body to arrive, which was now deploying in force along the slopes of Perrines Hill. For the next 2 hours, an indecisive artillery duel develops across the no man's land, as both armies catch their breath in the sweltering heat. Clinton knows he has lost the initiative and that there is no sense in attacking Washington's strong position on the hill. To make matters worse, by 4 p.m. the Continentals place artillery along Combs Hill, which overlooks Clinton's position. Left with little choice and satisfied with the battle, Clinton orders a withdrawal. Although Washington will harry the British retreat for the rest of the afternoon, the battle at Monmouth is effectively over. Washington intends to fight again the next day, but with the British baggage train now safely out of American reach, Clinton withdraws during the night. The battle has been inconclusive in both the tactical and strategic sense. But for Washington and the Continentals, despite fighting an almost entirely defensive battle, the unit cohesion and manoeuvring was for the first time truly professional, which greatly improved their performance and confidence after the battle. This is reflected in the casualties, where the British may have suffered over 1,000 dead and wounded, compared to lightly half that number for the Continentals. For General Lee, Washington's second-in-command, who led the confused attack in the morning, he will soon be found guilty in a court-martial for his actions during the battle, effectively ending his military career. For the British, the impact of France's entry into the war was about to be felt sooner than anticipated. The day after the Battle of Monmouth, Clinton is informed that a French fleet is on its way to North America. This fleet, under the Count of Estaing, arrives just days after Clinton's transport ships disembark his army in New York, narrowly avoiding a major disaster. For the first time in the war, the British no longer hold naval supremacy in North America, and their fleet is outnumbered and forced to shelter in the well-defended New York harbor. With Clinton contained, Washington and his new French allies decide to hit the British where they are now most vulnerable, in Newport, Rhode Island. Unfortunately for Washington, however, the first attempt at coordination between French and Continental forces is a failure. Following mistrust between Estaing and General Sullivan, and the arrival of a second British fleet, the French are quickly forced to abandon the attack. But the attempt nonetheless shows the potential, and both sides of the war know that the French will soon return. The Philadelphia campaign is over, and with it, much of the major fighting in the north. Under the leadership of Generals Gage, Howe, and now Clinton, the British had, for over 3 years, tried and failed to decisively defeat the Continentals or bring Congress to heel. They had underestimated their enemy, poorly coordinated operations, and failed to mobilize loyalist support. Washington's army, meanwhile, had transformed from disparate local militias relying on guerrilla tactics to a well-trained and seasoned fighting force, who now also counted the preeminent land power of Europe as an ally. For the first time in the war, the British were now truly on the back foot. But one final strategy remained untested for Clinton, striking into the southern, soft underbelly of the 13 colonies. Thank you for watching our series on the American Revolution, and of course, a huge thanks as well to our Patreon and YouTube supporters. Join now to get early access and vote on future videos. Thanks again, and until next time.